So, hello and welcome. I want to present you my topic communication strategies in international negotiations for the course Intercultural Business Communication. So, I will now show you the topics that I will cover. So, first, I will start giving general information about international negotiations. Then, I will go on with the components and the stages of negotiation. After that, I will tell you the difficulties and challenges, and then I will move on to the communication strategies. Thereby, I will give an example regarding Chinese negotiations. Then I will go on with negotiation choices and outcomes, and lastly, with the use of information technologies in negotiations. And then I have my conclusion. So, to start with international negotiations, to have a clear definition in our mind, I chose the one from Oxford Bibliographies. It says that an international negotiation is a process of power-based dialogue intended to achieve certain objectives, goals, or ends, and which may or may not thoroughly resolve a particular dispute or disputes to the satisfaction of all parties. Which means that it is basically a dialogue between two or more parties where they are bargaining about a certain issue, about their objectives, and they are trying to find a positive outcome for all of the parties. So this arises especially with the globalization. So, for example, we have the World Trade negotiations, the international climate change negotiations. So it is really spread all over the world and not just around businesses or small companies, let's say. And this means that it has also a strong link to different cultures because diverse countries are involved and are communicating with each other. So they are, all integrated in this phase. And then there's, of course, a necessity of the ability to deal with the unknown and to be able to overcome these difficult challenges if you don't know your counterpart or if it is a culture that you are not familiar with. So, thereby researchers also confirmed that there is a relationship between the national culture and the negotiation style and success. So it depends on diverse factors, and we will cover them later on. So now if we come to the components of negotiations, we have, of course, the parties. So just as mentioned, can be two or more parties. Then we have the important part, the process. So if we would have an effective process, we would manage the negotiation strategy, its stages and tactics used effectively or in an efficient way. So it gives the kind of the direction of how the negotiation will end. And then, of course, we have the agreement or the outcome of the negotiation. So if we look now on the stages of negotiation, first we have the planning phase. There we have to identify our objectives. We have to set limits if we have any. Then we have to focus or decide if we have short run or long term horizons, objectives. and we want to make sure that we can establish a common ground so that we can communicate easier with the counterpart. And thereby, it is, of course, very important to build the interpersonal relationship, because trust is very crucial in this part, in a negotiation phase. So we have to try to gain the trust of the counterpart, to have better deals and to have it easier for us. And then comes the part where we exchange our information. So there we can find out which objectives the counterpart has. And then we can, for example, start to persuade them, which depends on various factors. And we can change or improve our options regarding their objectives or regarding their behavior or cultural norms or something like that. And lastly, we have the agreement. So to continue, I will now first show you the difficulties and challenges which may appear. So just as mentioned, there could be cultural differences because of a lack of cultural knowledge. This means that, for example, it can influence the size of the team. So according to Hofstede's cross-cultural dimensions, if we think of this, he said that most Western cultures are based on individualism, whereas Asian or Middle Eastern countries are more based on collectivism. So this would mean that, for example, an American would send one person to represent the company, let's say, whereas a Japanese company would prefer to send a whole team consisting of 4 or even 10 people. So this depends on this cultural aspects of the countries. Sorry. Then we have, there might appear exaggerated criticism, sarcasm, or also derogatory language. So we should really try to avoid these, because this would end up in conflicts which we may not avoid at the last phase, so we would not come to a positive agreement or outcome at the end. Then we have also the political issues. So it might be an advantage to really know about all the politics going around in the world, and to try to stay neutral in this way, to avoid unnecessary discussions. I'm sorry. Then we have, of course, conflict situations depending on diverse factors and intractable parties, for example, where the one party might ignore in a way the other opinion and just be convinced about their own statement, and this would come to failure if they are not able to really be open to the counterpart and to negotiate in this way. Then we have the lack of confidence that might appear in some persons, by some persons, and lack of time. If you are in a hurry, and you have to deal with a very important negotiation, you have to spend a lot of time in it, because negotiations can take hours or even days or months. So you should be aware of that and take your time. And lastly, the lack of patience. So this is also connected to the time. So you should be patient and don't give up. If you can see a potential that you might achieve your goals at the end, then you should wait and seek to achieve them continuously. So now we come to the communication strategies. There are various types of strategies to succeed in those international negotiations. I'm very sorry. So we should research the counterpart's background, the experiences, to be aware of who we are talking to. And then we should also analyze the situation, acknowledging what has been said. And this might be done by summarizing the important facts, so you can show that you're listening and that you understood what the partner is telling you, which also builds trust in a way. You should, for example, also use I statements, because it might be too hard if you always say like you are wrong or you're thinking not correctly or something like that. So you should tell about your own opinion and you should not accuse them. Thereby you should be clear, concise, and also convinced about your own purpose. You should be polite, positive, and receptive. Then you should also take and see the counterpart's perspective and possess power, so that you can be able to make better offers. Then you could structure your arguments in your head before the negotiations, so you can better have a way of telling all of the issues, all of the objectives that you have in mind. So this would be much easier to structure them first, so you know what you want to say. Then if it comes to a conflict situation between two parties, you may rely on a creative third party, so he could identify the major turning points which the others might overlook. So it might be better to have a third party in this way, who would then interact and who would then try to stop the conflict situation and try to move on with the negotiation. They should also focus on the content of the counterpart's offer and make a relevant counter offer, so you might meet the interests of both parties, so your own interests and also the interests of the counterpart. Moreover, you can think of best communication channels or tools considering the audience or the counterpart. So if it's not, if it's easier, you might prefer to have a Skype communication, or if you think it's better to have it face to face, then you should arrange a meeting and something like that. So you should also analyze the needs or goals that are realistically non-negotiable. So you should be concise, and you should just have it in your mind what you want to have, and you should stick on it and analyze them to avoid any counter arguments. Then what you can also do is to review the past communications. So just to ask yourself, what could you have done better? Thereby, you could conduct a SWOT analysis to show your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you might analyze the whole communication process to make it better in the next negotiation process. So besides, you could also study the culture of the counterpart before to act and speak accordingly. So you might identify the potential customs or even similar interests that you might have. And this would make it much easier for you. And then you should also take care of the way of greeting. So in many countries, it is really varying in the way you are greeting someone. So thereby you should again be aware of those cultural expectations, because this might affect your appearance either positively or negatively. And it could also generate goodwill if you are aware or familiar with the greeting expectations of this culture or of this country in this way. And then we have the point that if both parties are speaking different languages, then you should also ensure that there is or are interpreters that can avoid any misunderstandings, and you would also save time with these. And then you should also probe the real interests of all parties. So this means, again, you should identify their interests and possible concerns or needs. And you could also focus on their emotions to really try to understand what they are just trying to achieve. And then you could also apply or come with common interests. So you could then develop relevant options for both of you and have a better solution at the end. Thereby, you should also not design positions but options. So you should really try to meet the interests of both parties and try to maximize the joint gain for all of the integrated parties. And thereby you can also identify doable alternatives. You should think of best or worst alternatives to be open to the other party in any case of disagreements. So you might think of the risks, the costs, and all the effects. So these strategies would help to have it easier, be more convinced about your own position, and to avoid any differences, any difficulties, and overcome these challenges. Where we also have that you have to be careful of those facial expressions and eye contact, because in a lot of countries they're really focusing on how you are behaving. Body language is very important for them, so you should be aware of that also. And you should redirect the topic to resolve the easy issues before dealing with difficult ones, which would also be a good strategy, which would give you more confidence. And then you could also use breaks to rethink strategies and ease the tension in the room. So after that, you could also summarize again the important issues and show that you're really in it and that you're listening and understanding your counterpart. And in any case of inefficiency or desperation, you might also change your representative member if he is just insecure and he cannot deal with it anymore. You could also change him. And finally, You should also summarize all of the agreements that you made. You should clarify all questions and also the potential risks, so both parties are aware of all the issues that might appear, either positively or negatively. And yeah, that's it in this way. Now we have this example with Chinese negotiations. So this might be of high importance because China is really influencing the world's markets. So, for example, in China, they are highly valuing the personal relationships. So there, it is really important to build this personal trust and to get the harmony between the two parties. And this you could reach with key or high level contacts. You might hire people that have close connections to the counterpart. You could also build multiple ties with the other side, if you know all the people that you might be dealing with within this negotiation. And thereby you should also pay attention to spend enough time face to face, because Chinese people, they are really focusing on this face to face personal meetings, these personal trust, as I mentioned. And you could also integrate intermediaries, especially if you are stuck in any situation. If it is a difficult point that you are really insecure with, this might be also be an option. And there we again have to be patient and show endurance. So because Chinese people tend to have more slow deal making process, so it could also take years to get to a solution. And they are really extensively having this opportunism, so they are really stuck into their own mindset. And so you should be aware of these things. It's just an example. You should always be aware of all the cultural beliefs or customs, norms. And now we come to some negotiation choices and outcomes. Just to give you a short overview. For example, if we have cooperative goals, this would be a choice where you are more integrative. So you are asking a lot of questions, you are also giving crucial information. Whereas if you have competitive goals, you would make just positional statements or even threats. So you would more focus on yourself than on the counterpart and his opinion or his objectives. So for cooperative goals, you are also trying to solve all problems, and you are really open to share crucial information to have more high joint gains at the end. Whereas on the other side, you would create this value for yourself, and thereby you would create more distance to your counterpart. So this would also in a way end up with higher risks of impasses and conflicts. Whereas if we go to the left side again, we have this interdependency between the negotiators. So we are more really integrated, and we are really discussing about all of the issues. We are trying to have better alternatives for both sides. So the agreement would also create value for all parties. Whereas if we have more competitive goals, there is a higher possibility that forming an agreement would fail if we are not really just open to the other side, because we have to find a solution together. And now we have the use of information technologies for negotiations. These can shape the process, the whole tone, and the whole outcomes of the negotiation process. So hereby, we are not in a face-to-face situation if we have, for example, an email conversation. So we are perceiving the counterpart as more unknown, distant, and less identifiable to us. So we would make our judgments based on the message content. So this would also make it more difficult to build those stable or personal relationships. So you would have problems to identify the emotions of your counterpart, which would be a lot more easier in a face-to-face communication. So this means you have to deal with a kind of stranger, and thereby you should, still try to be fair in a way, and you might pretend, or let's say pretend to have a more efficient outcome for yourself than for both parties again. There might also be a lack of co-temporality if you are in different countries, and if the counterpart reads your mail 2 days after or something, so it would take a lot more time to get to a real solution, to an outcome. One more point or problem would be that it might easily lead to misunderstandings. If you again are reading the mail, and if you're just understanding it not correctly, and then you're directly building those negative judgments. So these information technologies for negotiations is really easier. So you could also be faster than arranging a personal meeting, because it also takes a lot of time for both parties. But as mentioned, it is less personal and less personal, and we are having this less mutual trust. So if we come now to the conclusion, we have seen that there are diverse communication strategies applicable for those international negotiations. So you should pick them together and just think of all strategies, build a structure in your head, and have those stages in your mind to be really aware of the whole process and how you can go on. So this means you should plan ahead, and also research about the counterparts. So this might also be helpful to avoid those conflicts, and to build this trust and strengthen the whole relationship. What we have also seen is that the communication flow depends on several factors. As mentioned, it depends on the culture, the mindset. It can also depend on the gender, the objectives of both parties, and the language, of course. So it is just a fact that all these outcomes at the end are just heavily influenced by all of these communication styles and the behavior and all of the expectations of the counterparts. So what you should better do is always reviewing the past communications to change, to be able to improve your strategies, and to be more successful in the next negotiation processes. And that is it. So here are my references. and I hope you enjoyed. And sorry for the breaks. So, yeah, I wish you a good evening.